Duke had no intention of losing to Pitt at Cameron for a second year in a row. Cooper Flagg made sure of that.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, folks, and welcome into the Locked On Blue Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your guest host for today, Andy Patton, the host of the Locked On College Basketball and host of the Locked On Zags podcast, filling in for the great JJ Jackson here as he's continuing his vacation out in Europe. Really excited about this. Love the opportunity to host different shows here. If you haven't checked out the Locked On College Basketball show, highly recommend it. Myself, co-host Isaac Shade, and our guest Leaf Tulane. Both Leaf and Isaac, recent hosts here on the Locked On Blue Devils podcast as well. Today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils brought to you by FanDuel, folks. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. Just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, Cooper Flagg had the highlight reel play that fans have been waiting for early in the second half as Duke cruised to a 29-point win over Pitt on Tuesday evening. Some revenge on last year's loss to Pitt at home. We're going to talk about this game. We're going to talk about Duke's suffocating defense, the performance of three of their star freshmen, and then we're going to close out the show taking a look ahead to Duke's next game coming up on Saturday against the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Starting out here, though, Duke blasts Pitt 76-47 ends up the final score at Cameron on Tuesday evening. Jeff Capel returning, of course, to Cameron. Last year they got a W. Blake Hinson, 24 points on 8 of 10 shooting. It was a real rough night for the Blue Devils. It was just a week or so after Duke had beat Pitt on the road. Pitt got that big W there, but this time no such luck for the Panthers as Duke cruises to the win here. A 9-game winning streak for Jon Scheyer's club. Their last loss was way back in November on the 26th against Kansas. Now 13-2 overall on the year and a perfect 5-0 in conference play. The best record any ACC team has had in the 20-game era is 17-3 at this point. The way that Duke is playing, and frankly, the rest of the ACC is playing, there is little doubt that Duke is capable and should, frankly, finish at or better than 17-3 in conference play. I hope to not jinx them there, but Pitt, one of the better teams in the conference, and Duke did not make this look like much of a challenge at all. And that's mostly thanks to an incredible performance from Cooper Flagg, and specifically an incredible second half. He wasn't bad in the first half, but he was in foul trouble in the first half. He picked up his second foul just before the under 12 media timeout. I think it was about 12:20 in the first half. Ended up sitting until about the 6-minute mark when Coach Scheyer brought Flagg back in the game. And as Seth Greenberg noted at halftime, to trust a true freshman, the second youngest player at the Division I level, to come back into a game and not pick up his third foul with a full 6 minutes to go in that first half, that takes some trust. That takes some confidence in the maturity level of a player like Flagg, who's, again, there are other types of players that maybe you feel a little bit more confident trusting them to not pick up a third foul. But Flagg, with the way that he's utilized, with his off-ball defense, with just the fact that we knew Pitt was going to go after him, and they did. Pitt singled him out. They targeted him. They tried to score on him for the last part of that second half and were unable to do so. Flagg finishes this game with 19 points, 10 rebounds, just misses another 20-point, 10-rebound game. He also had 4 assists, a steal, and a block. He was 7 of 11 from the field. That included going 1 of 2 from the three-point line and 4 of 6 from the charity stripe. And again, only 5 of his points in the first half. 5 points on 2 of 4 shooting, which means he was 14 points on 5 of 7 shooting in the second half. He started the second half, of course, as you'd expect him to, and then picked up his third foul pretty early in the second half. There was an out-of-bounds call that the officials got wrong. I think it was Ishleg lost the ball. It went out of bounds. The ref said it stayed with Pitt. They thought Knueppel touched the ball. He did not. It was very clear that ball did not get touched. Pitt re-inbounded the ball. Flagg immediately picked up a foul. And at that point, it seemed like that could have been a momentum swinging play in the other direction for Pitt. Flagg now has 3 fouls. The players are upset. Coach Scheyer's upset. And instead, what happened is Flagg gets steal on the same possession, gets out in transition, and throws down an absolute hammer dunk on Guillermo Diaz-Graham, the play of the year for Cooper Flagg. The kind of play that fans who have not tuned into this team that much, who have heard about Cooper Flagg, but for whatever reason are not buying him as the number one prospect. Maybe they watch more Rutgers basketball for some reason. Maybe they don't believe that a player who looks like Cooper Flagg can be as athletic as they expect him to be. Maybe they don't think he's a good enough offensive player. Whatever it may be, I hope they watch that play. Because if you don't think he's athletic after throwing down that dunk, I do not know what to tell you. Shortly after that, Flagg had another dunk in traffic in a half-court set, two-handed, big-time dunk. Again, on all over Pitt. I'm not sure who the defender was, but they got dunked on real aggressively on that second one as well. He pretty much coasted after that. Just a phenomenal performance from a player that just wins. He is such a winner. He is so good at helping this team do what needs to be done, whether it's getting steals, whether it's coming over and getting blocks on the help side, whether it's making great plays. He had a really good pass at one point that wasn't an assist because I think it was Malik Brown caught it, flipped it over to Knueppel, who hit a three, but it was the kind of floor vision that you just don't see from 6'9" guys. You just don't see from super young players the way that Flagg is. He's so mature beyond his years and showed every bit of why he is the best player in college basketball and the consensus number one projected pick. He looked every bit that part in this performance here against a good Panthers team. Wasn't just him, though. It was a really good performance all around from Duke's freshman class, particularly the big three of Cooper Flagg, Knueppel, and Khaman Maluach. Knueppel had 17 points, 4 boards, and a pair of assists. He was 5 of 12 from the field. Not super efficient getting to the basket, but he did hit 4 of 7 from beyond the arc and 3 of 4 from the free throw line. A very rare miss for Knueppel from the free throw line, was shooting 96% on the season before that miss. He had a really great stretch late in the first half, helped Duke pull away. They kind of let Pitt hang around for most of the first half until the last few minutes. I think from like the 6 or 7 minute mark until the 3 minute mark in the first half was when Knueppel hit 3 straight 3-pointers, gave him 11 points in the first half, again, finished with 17. He missed his first few threes, but then once he got cooking, boy, that was a big problem for Pitt. Could not slow him down on the perimeter. Maluach had a really nice game as well, 11 points, 8 boards, and a block. He was perfect, 4 of 4 on his 2-point attempts. He did miss a 3-point attempt, but he was 3 of 4 from the free throw line as well, to finish with those 11 points. He had an alley-oop dunk on the first possession of the game and was really active on both ends of the floor. Only had 1 block, but altered a ton of shots. Pitt really, really struggled on 2-point shots in this game. In fact, Duke's entire defense was not just Maluach, but the whole defense was unbelievable in this game. We know that the Ken Pom favors them as one of the best defensive teams in the country. Tennessee was number 1. They may still be because they had a good defensive performance against Florida, but if you didn't see their offensive performance, neither did anybody else. They really struggled, just scored 43 points against Florida and a huge loss for Tennessee. But Duke remains an elite defensive team. Pitt as a team, 18 of 58 from the field. They missed 40 shots, 31% from the field, 6 of 20 from 3, which means they were 12 of 38 on 2-pointers. You don't see teams shoot under 35% on 2-pointers very often, but that's the impact that somebody like Maluach, as well as Malik Brown and Mason Gillis, and really the entirety, of course, Cooper Flagg, the entirety of this Duke team, just phenomenal on that end of the floor. Jalen Lowe was averaging 17 points per game, had just 8 on 3 of 12 shooting. He was 1 of 8 on 2-point attempts in this game. Ish Leggett also averaging about 17 points per game. He had just 4 on 2 of 15 shooting, including missing all 4 of his 3-point attempts. Well, all 5 Duke starters scored in double figures. Duke also had a massive advantage on the glass. We're going to talk about that and a few other things we saw checking out the box score from this game coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or that you realized you were paying for twice? Because that's definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions I didn't even realize that I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's kind of like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 per year when using all of the app's premium features. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. All right, folks, segment 2. Still Andy Patton filling in for JJ Jackson here on the Locked On Blue Devils podcast, and we're still recapping Duke's 29-point win at Cameron Indoor over the Pitt Panthers, who were the 22nd ranked team at KenPom coming into the year, a team that was starting to get a little buzz as a potential top 25 team, and Duke made quick work of Jeff Capel and the Panthers in this one. We're going to take a look at some of the other stats, notes from the box score here after the finality of this game. I mentioned it in the teaser there. All 5 starters were in double figures. So we talked about the 3 superstar freshmen for Duke. We talked about Cooper Flagg leading the team with 19 points. Knueppel was next with 17. Tyrese Proctor had a nice, it's kind of a under the radar game, but he hit some clutch shots. And this one finishes with 13 points. Maluach had 11. And then Sion James, very active early in this game, finished with 10 points. Again, giving all of Duke's starters double figures. Now, wasn't a ton of bench scoring from Duke, which is something that's not super rare for Duke this year. They have a phenomenal team, but a lot of times you're going to see the starters pretty much dominate, and that was kind of the case here. But I really liked what we saw from Mason Gillis in particular in this game. He only finished with 5 points. They both came on, I don't think it was quite back-to-back possessions, but it was very short succession. It was kind of in that period of time in the first half, kind of right before Knueppel got going, where Duke was playing okay. I think they had like a 8-4, 6-point lead, something like that. They went on a big scoring slump. They were 1 of 12 at one point, with Flagg hitting a 3 being the only points they scored from like a 5 or 6 minute stretch in the middle of the first half. And I think it was shortly after that Mason Gillis put the ball on the deck, drove to the rim. It wasn't a super pretty shot, but he scored a kind of a much needed bucket for Duke. And then I don't think it was the next possession. I think it was the one after that. A nice swing around play got Gillis open for 3, and he knocked it down again. He only finished with those 5 points, but it was a nice night for Gillis, doing what you wanted him to do. This is why Duke went out and landed Gillis in the transfer portal from Purdue, a player who's a winner, a player who's used to playing a small role on a very talented team. And he did exactly what you wanted to do in this game. He played tough-nosed, physical defense. He knocked down the shots he needed to shoot. He didn't demand the ball. He didn't take a bunch of bad shots. He did what he needed to do. That's what you want him here to do. Malik Brown, same thing. Only had 1 point in this game, but he had 4 rebounds and an assist. He didn't take any shots. He was just 1 of 2 from the free throw line. So again, you can complain about the bench not scoring many points, but it's not like they were out there missing a whole bunch of shots, with Gillis going 2 of 3 and Brown going 0 for 0 with just the 1 point at the line. Your other 2 freshmen, though, Isaiah Evans and Caleb Foster, neither of them scored, Isaiah Evans being your other freshman. He was 0 of 3 from the field in this game. Foster did not take any shots. So again, only 6 points from the bench, but it was just the kind of game where the bench players didn't really get super involved in the offense, and they did other things to help this team win, including rebounding the basketball, which Duke, massive advantage on the glass in this one, 41-26. In terms of total rebounding advantage over the Panthers. And the interesting thing, both teams had 9 offensive rebounds, but Duke just had 32 defensive rebounds compared to just 17 for Pitt. Part of the reason, Duke missed a lot less shots than Pitt. We talked about Pitt missing 40 shots from the field in this game. Meanwhile, Duke shot an even 50% from the field, 26 of 52. They were 11 of 20 from the three-point line, 55%, blistering hot for the Blue Devils. Look, if Duke's going to hold you to 31% from the field and they're going to shoot 55%, there's not a team in the country that's going to beat them. That is a guaranteed fact at this point for Duke. Knueppel, we mentioned 4 of 7 from the three-point line. Proctor, like we said, hit some big shots, 3 of 4 from the three-point line for him. Sion James, 2 of 2. Flagg and Gillis each went 1 of 2. Really nice shooting night for Duke. They didn't need a bunch of threes, but it doesn't hurt to knock down 11 of them, especially when you do it at plus 50% from the field. 17 assists for Duke as well, distributed the ball pretty well. They did have 14 turnovers. I think if you were to point to something that maybe wasn't so great in this game, it would be that. 17 to 14 assist to turnover ratio is certainly not as good as John Shire would have liked to see it in this game. Flagg had 5 of those assists to lead the team, 4 each for Sion James and Tyrese Proctor. Gillis, coming off the bench, had a pair. Turnover-wise, Flagg and Proctor each led the team with 3, while James and Khaman Maluach each had a pair of turnovers as well. And while the team was very, very good defensively, as we highlighted with Pitt's abysmal shooting night, both from the 2 points and from the 3-point line, there wasn't a lot of stops, not a lot of steals, not a lot of blocks. And in fact, just 5 total between those 2 categories, only one of them being a steal, which was Cooper Flagg, and 4 blocks, 2 of them by Cooper Flagg. No surprise, he tends to lead the team in basically every statistical category. Actually, Flagg only had 1 of the 4 blocks. Sion James, not typically your leader in blocks. He had a pair. Maluach had a block as well. What stood out to me that was kind of interesting in this game is Duke had 14 turnovers. Pitt had 11 turnovers. Not surprised. You don't typically expect to see the team that had the 29-point win actually have more turnovers than the other team. But for Pitt, they have 11 turnovers, but Duke only has 1 steal. Meanwhile, Duke had 14 turnovers and Pitt had 11 steals. Couple things that means. Obviously, for Duke, you don't want to get the ball stolen from you 11 times in a game. That is not good. That is probably the most notably bad stat out of this game. You could argue 6 bench points isn't great either, but it just, in the context of the game, didn't matter all that much. But for Duke, that means they only had 3 non-steal turnovers. That's fantastic. One of the best hallmarks of this Duke team has been the ability to take care of the basketball, to avoid careless mistakes like offensive fouls or shot clock violations or traveling. Didn't see very much of that in this game. When they did turn the ball over, it was because Pitt got their hands on the basketball, knocked it away. It's a good defensive team, and they were able to make some plays out of that, but didn't capitalize as much as they needed to. Obviously, anytime you score less than 50 points, you probably didn't capitalize on the other team's mistakes as much as you should have. Pitt, not only the 11 turnovers, they only had 9 assists in this game. Lowe had 4 of them. Leggett had 3. Cam Corrin, their best player in this game, he had 2 assists. He also had 11 points, the only player for the Panthers to score in double figures in this game. Again, when you score 47 points, probably not too many guys scored in double figures. That was the case here. The other 4 starters for Pitt combined to score 20 points, while the 3 players who came off the bench combined to score 16, almost took over for the other 4 starters, with Cam Corrin leading the team at 11. Well, moving on from this game against Pitt, this big win for Duke, they got a couple days off. They're staying at home. On Saturday, they host Markus Shrewsberry and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. We're going to get you ready for that game against this Notre Dame squad coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Locked On Blue Devils podcast, still joined here as the guest host by Andy Patton, filling in for JJ Jackson while he continues his lovely vacation out in Europe. And we're moving on from our conversation, recapping Duke's 29-point win over the Pitt Panthers at Cameron Indoor on Tuesday evening, to instead talk about Duke's next game, which is not until Saturday, January 11th, still at home, still at Cameron, this time facing the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. This game is at 12 Eastern time. It will be broadcast on ESPN. And we're going to give you the best recap we can, or the best preview we can, about this Notre Dame club, with the caveat being that by the time Duke plays Notre Dame on Saturday, they will have played one more game, as tonight, Wednesday, January 8th, Notre Dame is playing NC State. I believe they're playing them on the road. So for right now, as of this recording, Notre Dame is an even 7-7 on the season. They are 1-2 in conference play. They've lost their last 2 games to Georgia Tech and to North Carolina. That North Carolina loss, devastating for Notre Dame, as they had every opportunity to win that basketball game, should have won that basketball game. But while they were up 3 in the closing seconds, instead of fouling up 3 like they probably should have done, they instead fouled Elliot Cadeau while he was shooting a 3-pointer, did not foul him hard enough to alter the shot. Cadeau, who missed a very similar shot against Kansas earlier this year, drilled this 3-pointer to tie the game against Notre Dame, got fouled, made the free throw. That was curtains for the Fighting Irish. Again, they are now 1-2 in conference play, heading into their game tonight against Kevin Keats and the Wolfpack of NC State. Again, as we're recording this right now, Notre Dame 91st at KenPom overall. Their adjusted offensive efficiency is 58th. Meanwhile, defensively, that is where they struggle, down at 144th in adjusted defensive efficiency. And they do not play at a quick pace under Coach Shrewsberry, 305th, according to KenPom's tempo data. So this is a team that's going to try to slow it down. They're going to try to grind it out. Not sure they play good enough defense to play that specific style, and I think their slow tempo probably not going to be a particularly great strategy against Duke's length, against Duke's size, against Duke's just defensive prowess, which we've seen on full display in this game against Pitt as well. And Irish, they're a decent offensive team in terms of efficiency. They're shooting a hair over 35% from the three-point line. They're shooting about 54% from the two-point line, and they are doing well defensively in one area, which is holding teams to about 30% from the three-point line. So that's an area where you could see some success for Notre Dame if they are able to knock down threes and play a slow down style where they limit possessions. They limit Duke in terms of the number of possessions they get. Duke doesn't shoot it well from three. Notre Dame gets hot from beyond the arc. There's a recipe, if all those things get mixed together, where Notre Dame makes this a game. But there's also a reason that KenPom's current projections have Duke favored to win this one by 20 with a projected score of 79-59. Obviously, at this point, we do not have a FanDuel line for said game, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is somewhere in that range, probably a little lower than that. I would guess something like a 15, 16 and a half point line somewhere in there. One of the key factors, not just in terms of the FanDuel line for this game, but just in general, the recent return of star guard Markus Burton. Burton been out for a very long time. His last game was November 26th against Rutgers, when he played 3 minutes in that game before suffering an injury. And then he returned kind of without a lot of fanfare in that game against North Carolina. He was back. He was on the floor, and he looked like he'd never left. 23 points for Burton, 2 assists and 2 steals. He was 7 for 11 on his 2-point attempts, although he did miss 3 3-point attempts in that game. On the season, in those 7 games that he has played, those 5 games before the Rutgers game, then the 3 minutes in the Rutgers game, and then the North Carolina game earlier this week. In those 7 games, Burton is averaging 18.9 points per game, along with 4 assists, 3.9 rebounds, and 1.4 steals per game. He's not a great efficient three-point shooter, but he does take a decent amount of them, about 4 attempts per game, shooting about 31%. Again, big factor in this game. If Burton gets hot, if he knocks down 5, 6, 7 3-pointers, which is absolutely a possibility for him in a game like this, that could make things a little bit more interesting for Duke than they might otherwise be. Burton, not the only player for this Irish club to keep a close eye on. Junior forward Tay Davis, having a very nice season for Coach Shrewsberry, 16.6 points per game, along with 5.5 boards, 1.7 assists, and just under 1 steal, shooting about 56.5% on his 2-point attempts. Not much of a floor spacer, though, 26.3%, and that's on only 1.4 3-point attempts per game. And then, of course, the coach's kid, Braeden Shrewsberry, who followed Micah Shrewsberry to Notre Dame. He was originally going to join him at Penn State. Instead, joins him at Notre Dame, having a fantastic sophomore campaign, 16 points, 2.7 boards, 1.6 assists, much better three-point shooter, the three-point shooter, the three-point specialist for this Notre Dame team, 37.2%, which is very good, and an even more impressive 8.1 three-point attempts per game. This dude is a long-range shooter. He's going to take a bunch of them. He's potentially going to knock down a bunch of them. If there's anybody you need to get a hand in their face in this game, it is definitely Braeden Shrewsberry. And then last but not least, another player to give a mention to here, the only other player on this roster averaging in double figures, that is Princeton transfer guard Mal Aloko. He was a senior this year, spent 3 years at Princeton before coming over to Notre Dame for this year. He's averaging 10 points per game, as well as 4.4 boards and 3.6 assists. I'm curious what his role looks like with Burton back in the mix. I think that he's going to be sidelined a little bit more, but he filled in very admirably when Burton was on the bench and is still going to be a big factor for this Irish team. He, like Shrewsberry, one of the few names you really got to keep an eye on out on the perimeter. He doesn't take nearly as many three-point attempts, only 3.9 three-point attempts per game. However, he is knocking them down at a very elite 46.3% clip. So between Aloko and Shrewsberry, you do got a couple shooters to keep an eye on for Notre Dame. Obviously, all these numbers are before that NC State game, so we'll see what things look like heading into that game on Saturday. Duke, like we said, the all-time record in the 20-game era for the ACC is 17-3. Duke well on their way to that. This Notre Dame team should not be one of the losses that Duke takes if they take any losses in conference play. Certainly not a team you want to look over, but at home, this should be another W for Duke as they continue to make a case to not obviously remain in the top 5, but to potentially climb up as they're 4th in the AP poll right now. Could move into the top 3, especially after Tennessee got waxed by Florida in that game on Tuesday evening. It's going to wrap it up for me today on the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. Folks, thank you so much for continuing to tune in. I know JJ is a fantastic host, and we're very happy to have been able to help him out here while he was out on his vacation. And like I said, check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast. As you can probably imagine, there's a lot of talk about Duke. There's a lot of talk about this team, about Cooper Flagg, about how this season is going for the Blue Devils, the expectations. Can they, get back to the Final Four? Can this young team, which we haven't seen a lot of freshman-focused teams, really have a ton of success in the more modern era? But this team is certainly built to do so. Can John Shire lead them into the Final Four, potentially to a national championship game? We don't not only have shows 5 days a week, just like Locked On Blue Devils, but we are also recently debuted our Locked On College Basketball Game Night, which is a Saturday night show, usually around 11 p.m. Eastern time. So if you're out late, you got an extra cup of coffee and you want to listen to a recap of the Saturday games, definitely check it out. Our regular guest, Leaf to Lean, who recently hosted an episode of Locked On Blue Devils. He is the host for Locked On College Basketball Game Night. Check it out in your feeds, wherever you get Locked On Blue Devils, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Spotify, Apple, anywhere else. Check out Locked On College Basketball as well. Thanks again, folks, for listening. And I'll say it to you once because it's not something my listeners on Locked On Zags are going to want to hear all that often, but go Blue Devils.